Welcome to the Hail Varsity post-game reaction show. Got by the Gophers edition, I guess we'll call that, as is tradition in 2020 when Nebraska loses as a home favorite, double-digit favorite. I'm joined by Greg Smith. Greg, we did this for the Illinois game. How are you?
I am well. You can't call it that we're bad luck because the game happened and then we were together. So no, I'm not. We're not the bad juju in this case, but somehow we get to do the triage of these situations.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to get into, maybe too much to get into for a 10 or 15-minute video. So we'll try to keep it moving here, but I guess let's maybe work big to small, because I think a loss like this again kind of brings up a bunch of the big questions. What's top of your mind when it comes to that, Greg?
Yeah, it's really Nebraska's inability to get momentum going, to sustain it, to kind of take that next step. And it's not, and maybe even taking that next step is a little too strong. It's taking, because you think of that, you think of like the fifth step, right? Like
Right.
even taking that second step to really kind of capturing something. And something that I outlined this week in my recruiting notebook was that Nebraska had a real opportunity here in a matchup of two-win teams to really capture some momentum and get things rolling in the right direction. Of course, it wouldn't be me without mentioning that on the heels or eve of National Signing Day, the early edition coming up next week. And they once again found a way to not capture that momentum. And I think that to me is the big thing coming out of this game. And you saw it, even that big picture item, you saw it manifest itself within this game as well, is that they came out flat, but they also then had issues once they started to build momentum within the game. They couldn't get it going or sustain it.
Yeah, it's strange this year in particular. The the program itself, it seems like the negative image, the bizarro world version of the offense itself. This offense, and again, today was like a classic example of when it's on schedule, when things are rolling. And I think this is why you hear him talk about momentum so much when they're talking specifically about how the offense plays. Like, they're good. There are a couple drives where they, hit, and they just go right down the field. Um, but this offense really struggles in passing downs. That breakdown today was 20% success rate, which Nebraska was already bad. So those are not passing plays. Those are plays where they're behind the chains.
Right.
And Minnesota, I mean, this was a marked difference because Nebraska really held up, I think, pretty well against the run. Muhammad Ibrahim, who is a great back, and I was just really impressed with him as a player
Oh, yeah.
coming out of this. I don't know if you saw it on the TV broadcast, but Markel Dismuke had his head down in the end zone at the end of the game there as Minnesota salted it away, and it was Ibrahim who went and kind of consoled him and talked to him. Who knows what they said, but it was just really impressive. But Minnesota was 40% on passing downs, which is to say Nebraska was doing a good enough job. I thought particularly, this is one of the keys to the game for me, was how does it hold up against the run on first down? Did pretty well, like one more than of those downs than I thought it would, but Minnesota was just able to make it up. You would have expected some of that. The Gophers were second nationally in passing down success rate, this offense. And boy, did it hurt Nebraska in a big way. So, I got a little offense focus there for a second, but to kind of go back big picture wise, this is a program that I think it's struggling to like really address where it's actually at, because this result. So, I should have done a better job at the beginning mentioning Gophers were without 30 some guys. Hadn't played for 2 weeks. They overcame a lot. Nebraska had a lot going in its favor. As you mentioned, we were starting to talk a little bit, and I think this is, it's easy to really lose sight of things in a loss, particularly one like this. But you're starting to talk about, hey, maybe Nebraska finishes 500. Maybe Nebraska even finishes 5-4. That's off the table now. At least, well, they dropped to what, 2-5 now, 2-4. I don't even know how many games have been played.
2-5. I think it's 2-5. It's the only missed one.
Yep. Okay. So the official stats are wrong. I was pretty sure it was 2-5. Minnesota approved 3-3. And without the factor of we didn't know who was going to be available for Minnesota, like this game was closer than the 10.5 point spread was. And it had actually dropped at like 8.5 shortly before game time. So it wasn't technically our second double-digit home loss.
There we go.
So can't put it all on us like you were saying. But
Good.
I don't know. What did you think offensively from Nebraska?
I thought that I'm with you on those two drives in particular where they really had things rolling. And I think I tweeted out that Nebraska's offense is cooking. And I thought that Nebraska, from that point forward, would find a way to continue to move the ball. And then they had that drive, I think, that resulted right after that in the missed field goal, in which they still kind of moved the ball down the field with relative ease on that drive. And then for whatever reason, it got away from them completely. And whether or not that's Nebraska is still struggling to be able to run the football in that time, which still kind of reared its ugly head throughout the game, even when the offense was doing well, even though Wandale had that one big run. I think Mills had a nice run in there, Adrian as well. But then also the difference in the types of pass plays that were happening and whether or not it was different calls that was happening, or if Adrian was seeing those guys and then trying to make those throws that had been open all game, but just missing them. Yeah. Like it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what's wrong with the offense, especially in the passing game. The run game, it just kind of looks like they have a hard time sustaining blocks and blowing holes open. In the passing game, the scheme is sound. Like, and I think that to me, when I watch it, it's almost more frustrating that way when you see, okay, guys are open. And oftentimes it's multiple guys open and those passes are not being completed. And I think that's why you see the lack of explosive plays, especially in the passing game from Nebraska. And I think that would cover up for a lot of these mistakes, right? If you start hitting those passing plays, all of a sudden you're not talking about how they struggle to run the football because they make up for it with explosive passing plays. And so that's what I think the offense kind of gets off kilter. And then it's still just too feast or famine. It's still Nebraska either slices right through a defense or boom, 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 3 and out. And that's really tough to deal with.
Yeah, it was interesting. So my theory on this, and it's tough to do on just one live watch. Like, it'll be interesting to go back and rewatch this and see. So Adrian is 13 of 15 in the first half going into halftime. So really at that point, like Adrian Martinez has completed like 85% of his passes over the past 10 quarters. And you're like, okay. I think Nebraska felt pretty confident in its ability to move the ball. And of course, like I know I felt confident about Nebraska's ability to move the ball coming in. They actually, for where this Minnesota defense was at, didn't do quite as well as I thought they would. But I didn't feel that at halftime. Like I felt like that game, even with the Cam Taylor-Britt, the unfortunate targeting that removed him from the game, but more importantly, gave Minnesota a score right before halftime. It kept a drive alive. I still felt like Nebraska had the best of it at that point. And then you come out in the second half and like I said, I'll have to go back and watch the game again to see if it seemed like they were trying to stretch the field a little bit more. Or maybe Adrian was just a little bit off. Those 2 incompletions at halftime were big ones. They were potential big plays that were there. And to your point, like they're really missing those. They just have to scheme, it seems like, everything they get. And sometimes the scheme presents these opportunities for those big plays, and they're just not hitting them. It's tough to figure. A couple of those passes could have been better. Well, those 2 for sure, and then some more in the second half. But I think wide receiver still remains a work in progress too. Having some guys that maybe catch 1 or 2 of those balls that maybe aren't perfect.
Right, because you're going to need that based on what we've seen just throughout.
Right. Yeah, and that's probably a big one. Like you said, signing day's coming up next week. As we turn to 2021, that'll be a persistent question, I think. Let's flip to defense quick. I know you mentioned in our Slack channel, kind of late in that game, how you felt that Nebraska's defense was playing at that point. Get to the end of the game there. Did you still feel the same?
Yeah, I still feel like, and I I feel like that this has been a really, and I don't know if it's still underrated because I feel like more people are talking about it, but it might still be underrated factor in kind of the Frost era thus far is that I feel like on the whole, the defense has played better than the offense. I think it happened again today. And I think that I think on a rewatch or a really like get inside the nuts and bolts of the game, people will come away thinking the defense played even better than they did. Yeah, they kind of broke at the end of that game, which has also kind of been the story of like these last couple of years where they do enough, and then finally break. But I always say to people who say, well, maybe they shouldn't have broken. Well, they also aren't expected to be, Alabama from a couple of years ago or, that Ravens defensive Ray Lewis. Like they weren't expected to be that. So I think they're outperforming expectations. And when you look at the couple short fields that Minnesota had as well in this game, which has also kind of been a consistent thing that defense has had to deal with, I think that they've played really good football that is better than the team overall record would indicate.
I would agree. So Minnesota entered today 18th nationally in success rate, 47.5%. Today, 38.2. So like, I mean, that's the first number I look at always. So you held it like that. Minnesota offense was good, like legitimately efficient. Nebraska held them below 40%. We already talked about the passing downs thing. That, that's when a defense is expected to succeed. So that one stings a little bit. But the rushing numbers, like you think about the big runs in this game, Minnesota had some really big ones, but the adjusted rushing numbers in this one, so taking out the one sack, 5.8 per play for Nebraska, 4.9 for Minnesota. So really being able, I mean, Mohamed Ibrahim got to 100 yards there at the end with that kind of great last drive where he had some tough runs and then he had the big run to seal it and the smart play to basically end the game by not scoring. But you gave him 24 points, like, and I didn't add it up, but Nebraska's got to be in the 28-point range, 27-point range, which is about average in terms of points given up. With what you think this offense is supposed to be and what it could be, like you'll take 24 points all day. And they're just – Nebraska's defense has made some real gains this year. The one thing that's a little bit missing, which is strange based on where they've been, is some of the havoc plays. So they're missing some of the sacks, certainly missing some of the turnovers. I mean, really, like if you are – I'm hesitant to even say this, but because it's not, I'm not trying to make an excuse, but like if you really want to boil this down and get outside of just the disappointing result, the fact that you should have beat this team based on all of the factors coming in, the difference was the two turnovers. On average, those are worth about 5 points apiece. So that's 10 points in favor of Minnesota. You lost by 7. Yeah, the Gophers could have punched another one in there late or at least got a field goal. Then you'd be at exactly 10. But expected turnover wise, based on the passes defended Nebraska had, they had 7 pass breakups, no interceptions. You'd expect to get about 1.4 out of that. Minnesota only fumbled once. Those are 50-50. But expected turnovers for the Gophers here, 1.9. They ended up with 0. Expected turnovers for Nebraska, 2.1, and they had 2.
Yep.
And, again, it's not to like sugarcoat this or paint over anything because we've got a long off season ahead of kind of going over exactly where Nebraska's at. I do still think it's going to sound crazy to some people, but I do still think the overall trend from start of 2018 to now is slightly upward. It's just not getting there as quickly as anybody thought or wants at this point.
It looks, a part of the problem might be with that though, is that it just looks totally different than what you would have expected. Like, I think to this point, if you would say, okay, they've been really struggling, and as much as they have been, like, especially overall record, you would say, if you told someone that in 2018, I would have responded saying, oh, okay, the offense has been having to win shootouts and, the defense just can't hold them. But that's not what we're seeing. And so that to me is what is so jarring about it. And it feels like, and this is where I think Scott Frost says there's a lot of like, we're close. And, the players say it, the other coaches say it. And on one hand, you have to say that's factually true.
Yep.
Like today's game was it 12th loss by one score under Scott Frost. That is the definition of close. Like you see when you see passes up sideline to Wan'Dale Robinson where it's just off his fingertips, or you see the one, I think it was to Oliver Martin on that 2-minute drive. Like those things are close. Like, but at the same time, you then have to like step back a touch and say, well, how long can these things go on without you just saying this is what we are? And that's the danger, I think, that they're really, the danger zone that they're really in right now. And it's got to be tough mentally. Even though I think Frost said again today that he doesn't worry about the guys like kind of hanging their heads and falling out of it. But that has to be on the front of his mind for, well, we'll see if they get another week with this Champions game or what have you.
Yeah.
But that's going to be really difficult to overcome.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put that, because I spend a lot of time in the numbers, and there's a lot of ways to show that, yeah, indeed they are close. Like it's easier to back up that sentiment from Frost than it is to try and refute it. But you're right, kind of the dwindling resource here is we're at the end of year 3 now, basically, is patience. I don't think it's time yet, but it's certainly patience. You see that with some people out there in Husker Nation, and they have a right to be frustrated and upset and confused, all of those things. I think the moment that gives me pause is like, yes, I agree, you change a couple of things here, but it feels like there's just so little control over it. Like
Right.
when Frost says when things turn, they're going to turn quickly, I think that's true, but is it going to be because of what's happened these past 3 years, or is it going to be because, you get into a year and the turnovers go your way and you get some good bounces? And I mean, a lot of like good and special seasons are that,
Right.
but I've got Wisconsin, Iowa on, and it's an ugly game right now, but those are two teams that kind of make their own bounces and breaks. Minnesota's another one, and
They
I
have
think
become that, yeah.
they are, and they're not to the level that those other two are yet. But you go back to the turnovers. Like Minnesota put the ball in danger as much as Nebraska did, based on what you'd expect from national averages. But it still ended up +2 for them in terms of takeaways, and that's what good teams do. Is Nebraska getting closer to becoming a team that can do that? And that's where you really, I think, lack the evidence right now, which is distressing here at the end of year 3.
Right, especially when you pit it against the teams that they have to overcome in the division and in the conference. I mean, I didn't even mention Northwestern, and this is all interrelated, right? And I think this is something that I believe you said to me before about like good teams in this league remove the variation. Like there aren't these like wild swings and all of this stuff, and Nebraska just has too much of that. So on one hand, you're trying to, Nebraska as a program, remove that. But then on the other hand, part of the problem making that worse is that you're playing teams that do a really good job of removing that, right? And so it just raises the degree of difficulty for Nebraska in that way, which could be overcome if Nebraska was doing what we talked about, getting those havoc plays on defense. They had high rates of that, it would be different. Or if they were doing high rates of explosive plays, that would also even the playing field on that. But they're not getting either of those, and they have the wild swings, and that's how you end up with the results that we see.
Yeah, it's a really, really hard division to be volatile in,
Right.
because as you mentioned, you've got 3 teams for sure in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Northwestern that are excellent at removing that sort of uncertainty, and Minnesota's getting there. And what do you have after that? That basically leaves Nebraska, Purdue, and Illinois fighting amongst each other to try and figure it out. And those teams, similar to Nebraska over these past 3 seasons, occasionally they're like, oh, Illinois' run game's really good. But then next year it's like, well, they're a big passing play team. And you just don't know what they are. So kind of a difficult spot to be in here towards the end of 2020. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting off season to see what the tenor is around things as we turn the page to 2021, because it's a year that, you don't write it off by any means, but in terms of eligibility, didn't happen technically. So who knows what that's going to look like for all these teams across the country. it'll be interesting. I can story about that sort of in the December issue of Hail Varsity, which goes to press tomorrow. So I don't know if I have to rewrite too much of it, but we'll see. I was not. I was expecting Nebraska to play a little bit better than they did today. So it goes.
Yeah, it will definitely, if nothing else, the offseason will be interesting.
Yep, there's some big picture questions to at least consider. I think for Nebraska as a coaching staff, just how they do things, how close they really are, how they can kind of coach some more consistency here. But that's probably enough for today. We'll wrap it here. Thank you guys for checking us out. Go to hailvarsity.com. We'll have plenty on the game, and go straight into signing days, I guess is the term, technically. But yeah, at that point, then I think we'll see. We don't know who Nebraska's playing next week or any of that stuff yet, but you don't want to end on this one. So hopefully they'll have an opponent there and a game to be played.
Hope so.
All right. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thank you.
Talk to you guys later.